even when this book launched, I had people, even well-meaning people, say, "Oh, that sounds like Christian nationalism. That's terrible." And people are scared of that because I think people assume patriotism means I always support every policy or whitewashing the sins in our history and all that kind of stuff. That's not what that means. We love the people, we love the place, but also we're cherishing these ideals. Even when you see injustice, the best way to work against that is out of love for your country. So repair comes from a place of love.
Yeah.
Correction comes from a place of love.
Hi, my name is Glenn Stanton, and I have the privilege of talking to a good friend of mine, Daniel Darling, who has written a very important new book called In Defense of Christian Patriotism. And I was very impressed with this book. I think it's an important book for Christians who are publicly and politically engaged to understand why patriotism is a virtue and a Christian virtue and something that we should not be ashamed of. Dan, let's jump into this. You begin the book by stating that America is living through a crisis, but a different kind of crisis, a crisis of ingratitude. I was struck by that. Paint that picture. Explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, we're really in a crisis of ingratitude when it comes to thinking about the country we live in. And I think it strikes me, Glenn, that when I talk to immigrants, for instance, they have such a love for America. At our school here, we have many of my students are either immigrants or children of immigrants. And we're talking legal immigrants, right? And they're the most patriotic, conservative people you will meet. I mean, Lee Greenwood all day, flags on their house, unashamed, because they know what they came from and they understand how good the country is. And I think when you have been used to America and this is all you see, you could start to take it for granted and all you see is the problems, right? And I see this as mostly on the left, but I see some of it too on the right, a little bit of, this country's lost, it's hopeless. And I'm here to say, as I think about patriotism, at the basis form, it's simple gratitude for what God has given us. I think if you understand history, and how fragile governments can be, how brutal governments can be, how most of human history has lived, we have it pretty good.
Yeah,
I don't think we realize that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that about your neighbors and some of your students. I regularly go to a Middle Eastern restaurant. The guy who owns it is named Sean. He's an immigrant. I asked him about, what do you think about the state of our nation right now? And he goes, "Sir, America is the best nation in the entire world. Nobody even close." Like, he is such a patriot because of his experience. And he's thankful to be here, and he's thankful to be counted an American.
And there's a lot of Christians, even conservative Christians, Glenn, who I think because we've been told over the last several decades, and you know this well, that there's been this rash of books and documentaries and, academics and even some evangelical leaders and pastors who have so shamed Christians for A, being politically involved, but B, expressing love for country.
Yeah.
That if you do that, it's idolatry, it's Christian nationalism, that people are ambivalent and nervous about that. You see this on July 4th, right? You watch every July 4th, I chuckle because people will express, they'll say, "Happy birthday, America," but they'll caveat it with, our 10 worst things we've ever done. I love America, but all these things. And I'm just sitting there thinking, we don't do that for anything else, right? On my anniversary with my wife, I don't say, "I really love you," even though you've done all these things. Or my son's birthday, I don't say, "Happy birthday," except here's the list of terrible. So it's just like there's this ambivalence about patriotism that I want to sort of demystify because I think it's really good.
And where do you think that ambivalence has come from? Because we do feel it. You're absolutely right. And we need to understand where that comes from, where it generated from. What is your take on that?
I think part of it comes from a misunderstanding as Christians that because we're citizens of the kingdom of God, because Christ should be our highest allegiance, that we then can't have any lesser allegiances, that we have to either choose God or country. And there are times where you do, right? If you think in the book of Acts where Peter says we have to obey God rather than men.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the time it's not a binary choice, you know. And I borrow in this book a lot from C.S. Lewis, Chesterton, and then even Augustine, who I think is borrowing from Jesus, and talking about it's not one or the other, but it's about ordering our loves.
Yes.
Right? So Christ is our highest allegiance, but we can have lesser allegiances. And we really know how to do that, right? 23 years ago, I stood at the altar and I pledged allegiance to my wife. And I knew in that moment that Christ is my highest allegiance. And if he was, then I would actually be a better husband.
Yeah.
And I knew that she was underneath that.
Yeah.
But the pastor wasn't saying, well, you have to choose between Christ and your wife. No, it's about ordering them. And we do this in other ways. And it's the same thing with our country, that you can love your country well if you have Christ as your highest allegiance. And I think most people are just feel like, oh, I can't think about patriotism. It's always idolatry. It's always wrong. It's always dangerous and scary.
Yeah, you say that in the book. You say, I'll be transparent. I'm a Republican and I have been my entire life. But then you go on to explain this ordering, this proper ordering. You say, of course, first I'm a Christian, then an American, then a conservative, and then a Republican. This ordering matters, you say. Explain why that matters and why you place those orders. Some are more obvious than others, but why do you place that ordering Christian, American, conservative, Republican? Why do you put them in that order?
Well, I think it's important. And I actually think if people always talk about, today there's a lot of narrative about Christians getting involved in politics is this dangerous thing, and that it's bad for democracy. And I actually argue that people who go to church every week and have Christ as their highest allegiance are actually better patriots because they have a sense of the eternal. Yeah. They have a realism about what they can do in politics. It's not a religion to them, and it tames their political passions. But I think this ordering is important, that obviously the kingdom of God, Christ is our highest allegiance. And then everything falls underneath that. So what that allows us to do is be part of earthly institutions that we know are temporary, but we can be part of those with that sort of kingdom mindset. So sometimes with these lesser allegiances, we have to say no to them because we're saying no to God. But most of the time, it's not a binary choice. It's about making sure what's first. And when those get out of order, then we have problems, right? If you love your country more than you love God, like I use in the book the example of Jonah, where he loved Israel so much he didn't want these other people to experience the love of God, right? And he didn't want to see their hearts change, And we can't have that mindset as Christians. When we love our country, we also should love the other nations, and we can do that because we love God. Or if you go down the list, right? If I think for me and the values that I hold as a Christian, the best political vehicle for this at this time is the conservative movement and the Republican Party. But because I'm a Christian, sometimes I have to, within that movement, say, no, there's things I can't do, or there's things I'm advocating, right? I had a friend of mine say that you should look at your political party less like a home base and more like a mission field. And I think that's good. So we bear witness within that party, but it's okay to be part of these earthly institutions as long as we hold them loosely and understand there's always going to be some tension there, some gaps. We're going to have to form coalitions with people we don't agree with and advocate positions we like. But if we keep that ordering in line, I think we can do this well. The problem is a lot of times we either get the order wrong or we create these false binaries. That I have to be a Christian means I can't be a member of a party. I have to be a Christian means I have to pretend I don't live in America and pretend I don't live in a place. I'm just kind of this free-floating spirit. And it's just not the way I think Scripture kind of lays it out for us.
See, and that's the important thing, Dan, is that God created nations. Like
Yes,
we are
that's right.
citizens of particular nations. And some
Yes.
nations are better than other nations. They
Yes.
do a better job of obeying what God has commanded and honoring their citizens. But you say in the book that every Christian has an obligation to love his or her country. Explain that. And is that true for all Christians in all nations?
So, I look at a couple things. One, a couple places. One, um, I think of G.K. Chesterton's essay on patriotism, which is really good. And he talks about patriotism allows us to start loving with the thing that's closest to us. And that by doing that, it trains us to love things that are farther out, right? And I think that's not dissimilar from the commands we see in Scripture where, say, First John, where he says, you can say all you want that you love God, but if you hate your brother who's close to you right here, you don't really love God. And I think there's a similar thing.
Yeah.
But then I look at passages in Jeremiah 29, and here the people of God are in Babylon. They're exiles, right? They're uncomfortable. In First Peter, Christians are called exiles because in many ways we're out of step with the culture. We feel uncomfortable. Sometimes people take that language and say, well, see, I'm an exile, therefore no loyalties to my country, no loyalties to the state I live in. But actually what Jeremiah tells the exiles is not to disassociate from Babylon, but to seek the welfare or the flourishing or the shalom of Babylon and pray for its success. And I just don't know, Glenn, how you can seek the flourishing of your country and be ambivalent about it or loathe your country.
That's
So
a
I,
great
I
point.
actually I actually agree with Richard John Newhouse, who wrote, I think 40 years ago, that patriotism is a species or a subset of discipleship. Like walking with the Lord faithfully will give you a natural love and affection for the place that you're at. In a healthy way, obviously. And of course, in America, it's a little bit, I think, easier to be that way than, say, if you're a Christian in another country. But if we understand what patriotism is, it's not blind allegiance. As Teddy Roosevelt said, it's not blind allegiance to an administration or policies. In fact, sometimes you have to oppose your country or policies because you love it, right? Dietrich Bonhoeffer went back to Germany and opposed Hitler because he loved Germany. And he wanted to see Germany be different and better.
And you're being faithful to the ideals of your nation.
That's
when
right.
a
That's
government
exactly
or a
right.
people is straying from that, you need to have an obligation to that, and that's what animates you and motivates you in that.
That's exactly right. And in fact, even when this book launched, I had people, even well-meaning people, say, "Oh, that sounds like Christian nationalism. That's terrible." And people are scared of that because I think people assume patriotism means I always support every policy or whitewashing the sins in our history and all that kind of stuff. That's not what that means.
Yeah.
It means, as you said, we love the people, we love the place, but also we're cherishing these ideals.
Yeah.
And I think, as I talk about in the book, even when you see injustice, the best way to work against that is out of love for your country. So repair comes from a place of love.
Yeah.
Correction comes from a place of love. And you look at the great social reformers. I mean, Martin Luther King Jr. revered the Constitution. He revered the founders. And his point was, I love these ideals. We haven't lived up to them yet. Frederick Douglass said the same thing. He didn't say, oh, the whole project is fraudulent. This is a terrible place. I want nothing to do with it. He said, no, this is a great experiment. Let's try to live up to that.
Yeah.
I think that's how you actually work for true justice.
Yeah, neither of them were let's burn it all down kind of guys.
Right.
They recognized the problems, and it was their citizenship that caused them to fight for that which is right and what wasn't being realized in our nation at the time. You talked about Christian nationalism. When I first saw the title of your book, I wondered how much of it was an answer and a response to what I see as the easy, lazy, reflexive accusation of Christian nationalism. Speak to that. Like, how much of your book, how do you see Christian nationalism as a legitimate accusation, and how does your book answer that?
I'm glad you asked that because I love talking about this. First of all, I think the term is used as a pejorative, as you mentioned,
An accusation.
an
Yeah.
accusation against any, and it's always toward the right, right? I mean, you
Right.
know, and I think a lot of our journalists, media, and the left has worked for the last, I think, several decades to push Christianity in the public square, and so they just don't have an understanding of how intertwined Christianity is with the American experiment and how much Christianity influenced the American experiment. So, like when Mike Johnson becomes Speaker of the House, improbably, and he gets up there and he says, basically, it's by God's providence and God appoints and takes down. The media freaks out. And these academics and people are calling him a white Christian nationalist. And when George Bush, and I'm old enough to remember this, when George Bush says his favorite philosopher is Jesus Christ, there were articles about he's ushering in this dangerous new theocracy. And all these people had to do was read a little bit of history. I mean, most of our leaders throughout our history, well into the 20th century, referenced America's Christian character. I mean, if you read Franklin Roosevelt's, FDR's D-Day prayer, he's praying to God with deep spiritual language for the success of us in that war. If a politician prayed a prayer like that today, heads would absolutely explode. I mean, Harry Truman was dedicating a church, a Presbyterian church in D.C., and he gave this speech, and he basically said, this experiment in human liberty will not endure without a healthy, vibrant religion, and he would say Christianity. Dwight Eisenhower. So this is normal language. So
Yeah.
I think most of my book is refuting that and saying it's good when Christians are engaged. We have a Christian the founding was heavily influenced by Christianity. Now, I will say, there is a subset of folks. I think it's a small group, mostly academics, whether they're Protestant, they self-define as Christian nationalists or Catholic integralists, and some of them are friends who are sort of dissatisfied with the constitutional order. And they sort of look longingly at this sort of medieval arrangement of a state church or, a Protestant Franco or something like that. And, as a Baptist, I would reject that because I think the founders were wise when they looked through church history and world history and said, every time you give the state that kind of power, the power to determine right and wrong worship, it's never been good for the church or the state. And, I'm a limited government guy, Glenn. The government can barely run a functioning post office,
Right.
much less have the competence to decide if you're worshiping right or wrong. And so that's not the role of the government. Jesus said, render to Caesar what's Caesar's, to God's what is God's. Paul tells Timothy to pray for them to let us live a quiet and peaceful life so we can advance the gospel. And so we don't want a state church. We believe conversion at the end of a sword is not true conversion. But that doesn't mean we want secularism. And this idea that the public square is neutral, as Newhouse said 40 years ago, the naked public square won't be naked very long. Someone's values will fill that. And so Christians should not be afraid to bring their Christianity to the public square, to run for office, to advocate for things that they believe in. Everybody else advocating is bringing their worldview, whether it's the LGBT movement, whether it's the left, whether it's various constituencies. We should not be shy about that as well. That's not dangerous for the country. And in fact, I've written about this, but a thick and healthy Christianity is not a danger to democracy. It's actually a preservative of democracy. And the founders understood this. Even our most secular founder, Glenn, Thomas Jefferson, who was a universalist, grew up in a milieu, an environment of Christianity, and he understood that the experiment won't work if you don't have a thick layer of virtue and religion and Christianity. They never envisioned secularism. Even John Locke, I don't think, envisioned secularism. And so that's kind of the argument I make in the book.
Yeah. And that's a good one. That's a good one. Okay, two more questions, and we'll end here. In chapter 5, you make what you call the case for American exceptionalism. Explain your case, and why do some people see American exceptionalism as a bad thing?
Well, there's a couple of ways to think about this, and I borrow a little bit from our mutual friend John Wilsey, who wrote a phenomenal book a few years ago about American exceptionalism. There's two kinds of American exceptionalism. I think one is to say our country is the greatest country, Therefore, it gives us the right to do whatever we want, to conquer lands. We don't care about the other nations. It's all about us. But there's a kind of open American exceptionalism that says, yeah, this is a great nation. This is I believe it's the greatest nation on earth. To whom much is given, much is required, and we're going to be held accountable. So I think these are two spirits, but it's not unnatural to think your nation is the best. And Chesterton, again, talked about this. He said, of course, everyone's going to believe that their home and their nation is the best. Why wouldn't you? This is a natural thing. When I go on vacation, I love traveling, but I love coming home. I think by objective standards, it's hard to say that America is not one of the greatest experiments in human government in human history. I mean, just look objectively at how radical this experiment is.
Yeah.
As Jonah Goldberg says, this is not natural, the natural way of things in terms of governments and societies. David McCullough, the late historian who I love, he was a very much an American exceptionalist, and he, having studied history, said we've never seen anything like this in human history. And so I believe it. I believe America. I don't think it's the kingdom of God. I think there's a lot of problems and flaws, but I do think it's the greatest country, this greatest attempted human government we've ever seen, and self-government. And I don't think we should be ashamed of that.
And the flow of immigrants, people voting with their feet, where are they wanting to go? They will risk their lives to come to America to build a better life. And we have to ask, are they dumb to do that? Do they not know all the problems that we have here? Or do they realize that for all of its flaws, America is a wonderful place? And we should be proud of that. Okay, I want to end with this. You have a chapter called The War on the Family. It was one of my favorite chapters because that's what I study. Why is understanding the importance of family and the war against it essential for Christians and for patriots?
I really think it's important. I think it was 60 years ago or maybe more when Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was an obscure sort of employee in the Labor Department it was Nixon's Labor Department, issued a report that was widely panned, right? About the breakdown of the family. And when you look back, you realize how prescient it was.
Yeah. It came out in March, I think, 1965. And you're absolutely right. It was a bellwether. And that report from a Democrat is really what launched the modern debate and war over the family. It was Democrats who did that, not Republicans and not religious conservatives.
Right. And you and I as Christians believe that marriage is between man and woman, and the best place for children to flourish is with a mom and a dad. But social science data is telling us this, Glenn, that even people who don't agree with our worldview are having to come around to say, this is the bedrock of society. I mean, we love Brad Wilcox, who at the University of Virginia, good Catholic brother who has done so much work on this and highlighting this. Every major social ill is downstream from the breakdown of the family. Every social ill, but even people who are not with us conservatively. I mean, I read the two-parent privilege by someone from Brookings. She's a self-described progressive, and she said, "I can't lie. This is what the data says." And so I think this is a major issue of our time. If we really want to renew the country and we love our country, I think we have to start with families. And I really implore and encourage us to defend the family, for churches particularly, to take this on. This is why I love Focus on the Family so much. And I know Focus gets so much heat for your position and the work you do, but the work you do to keep families together and marriages together is so important. And I really encourage churches to do this, right? To look around your community and say, where are the struggling families? Where are the struggling marriages? Because by doing that, you are, helping renew the nation. The family being the basic building block of the country. Yeah.
I've often thought that, Daniel, if churches could or would put out a banner, help for families here, help for marriages here, because the people in the churches are the ones that have answers for how to make family and marriage work. Those churches would be packed because people are looking for those kinds of answers. And you're right. strong families, strong marriages are what builds a community, and a community is what builds a good nation. And so Christian patriotism has to be interested in the strength of the family. And so I'm glad, so glad that you included that chapter, and it's such a thoughtful chapter.
Well, I think, and I want to tell people, if you are distressed about the direction of the country, there are real tangible things you can do in your community, whether it's helping families, being plugged into your church, helping in your local communities, right? That loving your country and being active is not just, let's all be mad on Facebook at the same time. There's real things you can do. And if you care about poverty, well, the family formation is a huge driver of that. If you care about education, all these factors really matter. And, it's funny because, Dr. Dobson, as we know, just passed away, and we really miss him. And he was widely mocked for his arguments about the importance of the family. And many people in that generation made these arguments about a slippery slope, and, they were mocked on late night TV, and, Mike Pence, he's such a prude with his defense of his marriage. You know what? They were all right. Every one of them were right about this. And now a lot of people are coming around to it. And I think it's incumbent on us Christians to really, as you said, help families in our communities and help renew the country that way.
Yeah, very good. Dan, thank you so much for being here with us, and thank you for writing this book. I encourage folks to get it, to read it, to look at it with your family and share it with friends, because it is a very important book about how we, not just as Americans, but citizens of any country, can serve God and love God by loving the nation that He placed us within and helping us be the citizens that He's called us to be. So, Dan, thank you so much, and thanks for being with us. Thanks for watching this Daily Citizen video. We create lots of great content like this every day, and it's all designed to help you think critically and live differently. Please give this video a like or subscribe, and consider signing up for our daily and weekly emails. I'm Glenn Stanton. See you next time.